but it's supposed to be used when people have a well-rounded reason for using natural family planning. So just keep that in mind. And I would say don't fear having a large family. I used to be like, okay, I just want 2 kids. And then I started studying this stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm okay if I have 3 or 4 kids. But I went to Seattle on a mission a few weeks ago, back in March. And we went up there, we were staying with a family who had 7 kids. And that was awesome. I'd never been around so many kids before. And it was a lot of fun just seeing all the interaction with the kids that they had. They had these wonderful friendships within the family, and it was a lot of fun being around those guys. But I think what struck me the most was the parents' attitude. The parents were just so at peace. You'd think with 7 kids that it's crazy and you don't want to be around there if you're a parent, but really it was a lot of fun being around there, and that the parents were really at peace. And I've heard that 1's crazy and 2's crazy, and those parents who have 1 and 2 are just, they've had enough, and so they don't want to have more. But I've heard once you get past 3, you've reached a level of craziness that you're never going to recover from, so you may as well have more kids. So that's just what I've learned. So I've learned to kind of go into however many God is calling me to have for kids. But keeping in mind still responsible parenting. That's still an important aspect for that. And another thing that natural family planning helps is for communication. So as a man, I feel like I'm doing a better job using natural family planning and communicating about my future wife's body. Is just making sure that we're still on the same page, but also talking about sexuality. Like, why are we doing this? What's the point of this? I think that really helps in communication. But I also think it helps with self-control. So if you learn how to say no to yourself, you know how to deny yourself, that can really have great benefits in terms of your relationship to others. And here's what Pope John Paul II says in his Theology of the Body. He says, man is a person precisely because he possesses himself and has dominion over himself. Indeed, inasmuch as he has mastered himself, he can give himself to another person. So what that means is, in order to truly give yourself to another person, you have to have self-control. You have to have self-control so that you can actually give yourself to somebody else. And I find that quite profound, that we have to learn to control ourselves, and then we can make that gift of ourselves to another person. And that's something that natural family planning really fosters. I don't think that contraception really fosters that, because contraception is just kind of, you can have sex whenever you want, whenever you feel like it. But natural family planning takes more self-denial. You have to say no to yourself, and you have to say no to your spouse, which is very, very difficult, I'm sure. But I want to talk about now some of the dark fruits of contraception. And there's some things that our society has missed because with contraception, they don't know what's going on exactly with this. And I think one of the biggest things is, since contraception has removed the procreative act of sexuality, it has removed parenting from marriage. And it's kind of reduced marriage to a sort of emotional companionship. And you can see that in a lot of issues that stem from contraception. The question is, why are we getting married? Why did we get married in the first place? And a lot of people, when they go through marriage prep, they ask that question. I've heard this before. Why are you guys getting married in the Catholic Church? They say, well, it's because we love each other. And then I've heard the response, well, I love pizza, but that doesn't mean I'm going to marry pizza. So there's something more profound. There's something deeper than that. So my advice to you is, when you go into marriage prep and they ask you that question, tell them, because this is the person I believe is going to get me to heaven, and any children that come from our union, that's going to help them get to heaven as well. So that's the answer to that question. Okay? And if you don't actually believe that, then maybe you have to re-examine why you're getting married. You might have to think about that and think about really what marriage is. And that's what it is. It's a sacrament. It's a sign from God of God trying to get you to heaven. And that person is there to help you get to heaven. But there are natural connections, as our culture has divorced the procreation from the unitive act. So they divorce those two meanings of the sexual act. And there's been some consequences. And we talked about adultery a little bit, but then there's these consequences as well. There's premarital sex and pornography, that if it's okay for other people to pursue their pleasures through contraception, well, it's okay just to pursue the pleasure itself. That's ultimately pornography there. But then we get into divorce. Now there's a connection between contraception and divorce, and people are denying it. But if you look at the lines, the prevalence of contraception, and you look at the line rate of divorce, you'll notice that those lines are pretty well next to each other. They follow each other pretty well. There's a good correlation there. And I think I looked at a study, and there's a survey that went out to 505 natural family planning women, and they got the study back, and there was 97% of those women had not been divorced. 99% of them were currently married, but a couple had been divorced in the past. And that was compared to a general Catholic population of women. 85% had never been divorced. So there's a big difference there. That's 12%. And it's a significant difference. Some people might say, well, okay, well, you're looking at the natural family planning women, and they're following natural family planning because the church teaches that, because contraception is a sin. So they're following that, and they're not getting divorced because the church says that that's a sin. So that's why I've heard that objection. So that's why that's how that works. However, when you look at the weekly church attendance, you'd expect church attendance to be high, because if people are doing natural family planning because the church says so, and they're not getting divorced because the church says so, then they should be attending Mass every week because the church says so, because the church says it's a world sin if you miss Mass on Sunday. And it turns out that there was only a 64% weekly church attendance amongst those natural family planning people, that group of women who were using natural family planning. So it wasn't because the church was saying so that they were using natural family planning and weren't getting divorced, because otherwise it would be all going to church, just like that. And I want to bring up another point here, that there were 18 women who had been divorced, 18 natural family planning women who had been divorced. But if you look at those women, 14 of them had been sexually active before they were married. What that shows is there were 4 women who had been divorced, but hadn't been sexually active before marriage. That's less than 1%. That's less than 1% of the women who hadn't been sexually active before marriage and didn't end up getting divorced. So I'd say I'm going to take my chances with the natural family planning thing here. And of course, there's another one, that there's a connection between contraception and abortion. A lot of people say, oh, well, if you're really pro-life, then you'll support widespread contraceptives because that prevents unwanted pregnancies. But actually, contraception promotes unwanted pregnancies, because people using contraceptives are sterilizing their unions in the first place, and they're already against life. Contraception is inherently anti-life. They're saying, no, I don't want to have a baby in the first place. So when a baby does sneak through, then there's problems there. So here's some statistics. 80% of unintended pregnancies result from contraceptive failure. Contraception is not doing its job. And 58% of abortions result from contraceptive failure. So as you can see from these statistics, that there's a lot of problems with saying that contraception prevents unwanted pregnancies. And just as a minor note, that contraceptives, there's different forms of contraceptives, obviously, but some of them actually work as abortifacient drugs. So, such as the pill. The pill generally prevents the fertilization of an egg, but sometimes breakthrough fertilization occurs. And then you have a fertilized egg, but what happens is the contraceptive prevents the endometrium, or the uterine wall, from building up big enough for the fertilized egg to implant into the wall. So what you have is a fertilized egg that's just hanging around and eventually just gets ejected because it can't implant. So it acts as an abortion right there. just using the pill. So the pills can operate as an abortion-inducing drug. And a lot of people don't really know that. But I would say that the final thing, and this is something that we're going through right now, that contraception is linked to, is the redefinition of marriage. And as I said before, contraception has paved the way for this to come because all marriage is seen as an emotional companionship. Parenthood is taken out of the picture. So if it's just an emotional companionship between a man and a woman, why can't it be an emotional companionship between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman? Or why not 3 people or 4 people or so on? I think our society is kind of going down that road, and we can discuss more in the question and answer session if you guys want to do that. So, as I said, there's a lot of dark fruits in contraception, but the one answer that we have to bring to the world is Jesus Christ. He's the one answer. Yeah, amen. And the Catechism says that Christ is the model of chastity. Every baptized person is called to lead a chaste life, each according to his particular state in life. And Gabby next says, man cannot fully find himself except through sincere gift of himself. And that's just like Jesus. Jesus gave himself to us. He gave himself up on the cross for our sake. And we're called to this in our marriage or in our vocation, whatever we're called to. And we're going to transform the world by our radical love. Jesus says in the Gospel of John, "This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So this is such a radical love that we're supposed to exude this love to the rest of the world. We're supposed to transform the love by our world. And that's how the early Christians did it. The early Christians transformed the pagan world because the pagans thought, man, that's a love that I really want. And so that's what we're called to as Christians, is to be that light in the world. That there's this culture of death out there, but we provide a culture of life. We're supposed to bring this culture of life to the world so that others may desire to share our joy and our happiness. And of course with that, and it sounds great and all, but there's going to be a lot of persecution as well. And as we learned, for those of you who went on the Freedom Christ retreat, Christ says on the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So we're truly blessed when we're persecuted for the sake of righteousness. We're offering ourselves back for Christ, for his mission. And that's what's going to ultimately help us be happy. And through that, and also reflecting God's love through our families. So I want to suggest a couple of resources here. There's the Theology of the Body for Beginners, and the audio CD, there's one at the Newman Center. It's Contraception, Why Not? By Janet Smith. She's very good with going into less of the theological stuff and more of the health issues and the environmental issues and all that. And then audio CD, Sexual Reconnection by Dr. Peter Craig. I think Father Ignacio has been talking about that. He really likes that one. So at this moment, I'm going to open it up for questions. And yeah, you guys have any questions on this topic? Or did I convince you all?
Or maybe someone wants to say something.
Or somebody wants to say
that one to add something, or like to share a testimony.
That was awesome.
Andrew.
I'll go. I'll try to be concise, but I'm still forming this thought in my mind.